Project configuration, setting up a base configuration on a switch. By the time we're done here, you will be able to implement a base level configuration for remote switch management. I want to first define what is a base configuration, because I know a lot of people when they hear it think, oh, well that means a basic configuration. And I'd say there's a slight difference. A base configuration is even less than a basic configuration. When I think of basic, I'm thinking, oh, well, you know, it's the simplest configuration, or the easy part of the configuration. And that's not what I think of when I think of a base configuration. A base configuration to me means a foundation configuration for you to build on. It's what you start with on your switches. And where every switch should start is a configuration to stop using the console port. You remember we have switches sitting in wall-mounted racks. We're now going to be applying configuration to those switches to configure things like the lag ports and spanning tree. I don't want to have to get out my laptop and go into the MDF or the IDF and plug into the console port anytime I want to change a configuration. Personally, I want to do it sitting in my cozy red chair. Thus, the base configuration that we're going to put on our switches will give them an IP address and the necessary passwords to allow us to access them remotely. All right, well, before we go and put a base configuration on those production devices, I cleared off the table and just put a Cisco SG300 10-port switch, because this mirrors the switches that we have in the production rack over there. So I figured if we can do it in the lab, we should be able to do it in the production, right? And I'm looking at the system light right here, and it's just going blink, 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 blink. And on a Cisco SG series, that means there is no configuration. I just pulled it out of the box. It's factory default. And you can also get there by shoving a paper clip into that reset button and wiping out the configuration. Now, my guess is that the switches have a configuration, but if we see the system light blinking, that's what that means. I just want to show you a quick side note. If that system light is blinking, I'm going to open up a web browser real quick and just do a quick Google for Cisco SG300 default IP. Just about every switch in the world nowadays that you buy out of the box will have some sort of default IP, or it will ask for an IP address from DHCP. I can see right here, this one is 192.168.1.254, so let's get connected. By the way, if you ever want to get a tech person a gift for Christmas, get them one of these. It's just a elastic strap blob, and you can just elastic strap whatever you want. It's such a cool gift. Thunderbird to Ethernet adapter, or USB to Ethernet if you don't have a Mac, and get that jacked in, an Ethernet cable. So let's get that connected. Plug in from Ethernet to, and you can plug into any port on that switch whatsoever. I'm going to go on port 1 just because, I don't know, it's the first. And I'll come back here to my system preferences, or if you're on Windows, you can head over to Control Panel Network Devices and do that here as well. I'm going to go to Network. There's my Thunderbird to Ethernet, and it looks like it has a manual configuration already of 192.168.1.100, which is great. It's in that same subnet. If it had something else, I would change it to be in that same 192.168.1. So I'll bail out of that, and let's just do 192.168.1.254, which it says the default IP, and boom! I'm sitting there at the web interface for this device, and I just wanted to show you that because sometimes setting up a console connection can be a little bit painful, so getting a default IP address can save the day. So let's move on and go straight into the console, because chances are good that the switches in the rack will have a default IP. So let's get our console connection going. Get it all plugged in. There we go. And open a terminal prompt window. Now, how many of you remember the command to access the console port from a terminal window? Well, on OSX, it's the screen command. But before we can do that, I'm going to do a ls/dev/star USB. And there's my USB to serial. So I'll type in screen. We'll do USB to serial and 9600. That's the baud rate that we're going to connect at. Hit enter a couple times. It says detected speed. What's your username? Username is Cisco with a password of Cisco. That's another Google find the defaults on that switch. And it says you want to change your password. Now, that was one of the things that we wanted to do for our base configuration. So let's go ahead and change it right here. I'll type in Cisco is the old password. Let's do a new password of, here, I'll type it here on a new terminal window. It's actually P@SSW0RD. It's it's a well-known password, so don't use that in production. But it works well in a lab environment. So I'll paste it in there as the confirm. And now we are sitting at the switch prompt. Now, before we go any further, I've got to go back to the whiteboard and give you an idea of switch modes. Now, you may not have realized it, but simply by landing at that prompt, we stepped into the world of configuration modes. See, there's all kinds of things that you can configure on a switch. I'm being very vague in my things because we haven't talked about a lot of those things yet. But for example, spanning tree, link aggregation, those are things that we can configure. And to help organize that, switch manufacturers have created these modes that you can go in. And in each one of these modes, you can configure different things. It's kind of like the control panel in Windows. There are all kinds of things you can configure in Windows, and to help organize those so it's not just one big pile or list of things, Microsoft has created these kind of modes. That's what I'll call them for now. For instance, if I click on user accounts, all of these settings are going to be reflecting exactly the things I can configure for user accounts. If I click on network and internet, then these things are going to reflect what settings I can change for the network and internet configurations of Windows. So when it comes to a switch, there are primary modes that you can go in to configure things. Now, I say primary just because these are the modes most often used. And I don't want to freak you out, but there are literally hundreds of modes on a switch because there are literally thousands of things that you can configure. So they get organized into all those modes. The first modes that we're going to learn are the user and privileged mode. I'm going to bring up a console connection to that switch we were just playing with. Now, I can see right here is the name of this switch, switch 6E33F3, which happens to be the last 6 digits of the MAC address. Now, what you see at the very end of that is very significant, a little pound symbol. That tells you what mode you're in. And the pound symbol happens to represent privilege mode. Think of that as I have just logged in as an administrator. Oh man, I just got logged out for idle time. Says I am terminated. So let me log in again real quick. Cisco and our new password. Boom. There we are. I'm sitting back at privilege mode. Now, I'm in privilege mode, just like you saw over here on the screenshot, because my user account, this Cisco account right here, is assigned full administrative privileges of the switch. But you don't have to have that. You can have users log in. And let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to type in the command disable, which disables my administrative privilege. And I'm just hitting enter a couple times. You can hit enter on a blank line all day and it'll just repeat the prompt. And what do you see? You see the prompt change over to this caret sign. And that tells me I'm in user mode. The difference between user and privilege mode is drastic in that user mode is very restricted. The main thing that you can do from user mode is things like ping to test connectivity and see if it's online, or some basic show commands to see some status about the switch. Only super entry-level network administrators use user mode. We want to be in privilege mode for most everything. The way we get to privilege mode is by typing in enable. Now, I think the problem is I haven't assigned a password to privilege mode yet. Let me just see if there, oh, sweet. I took a gamble on Cisco, and there's a default password in this switch of Cisco to get us to privilege mode. That was a total roll of the dice that was successful. If that hadn't have worked, I would have just typed in exit and logged out of the switch as a whole, where it says, okay, press enter, you're on the console port, and log back in with that privileged user. Now, user and privilege mode are nice because they allow us to verify things on the switch, but you can't configure anything from user or privilege mode. It's like logging into Windows and staring at the desktop. You may be able to see what's running in Windows, but you actually have to click and open a program to do anything. So our first configuration mode is known as global configuration mode. The way we get there is by typing in configure terminal. And I actually want to take a moment as I'm doing this to show you some of this general navigation stuff. Now, I'm working on a Cisco switch right now, but this is the same on just about every switch manufacturer in the industry. Why? Because everybody wants to be like Cisco. Of course, there will be slight differences because nobody wants to get sued by Cisco as well. But as long as you learn the principles of what I'm doing and not just memorizing commands, you'll be able to shift between manufacturers very easily. Now, I noticed that I got a little message shooting out, and that's fine. Anytime you get something like that, you can just hit enter. Enter on a blank line never hurts a thing. So this prompt right here, config with a pound symbol, says I am in global configuration mode. If I wanted to get out of that mode, I could type in exit, and that moves me back to privilege mode. If I wanted to go back into that mode, I could type in configure terminal, and I'm back in. That command's actually very hard for me to type because I'm so used to using a shortcut of the tab key. See, here's the scoop. Let me exit back out of this. There are many commands that you can type on a switch, and if you're ever curious what commands you could type, just hit the question mark on the keyboard. It automatically brings up something known as the context-sensitive help. This shows all the commands and a brief description of what they do. You can press the space key to go a page at a time, or enter to scroll one line at a time, or Q to stop the output. Now right at the top, I see there's my configure command. Now you notice there's also some other commands that start with the letter C there, copy and crypto. And you might be thinking, that's a random statement to make. Why would I care what starts with the letter C? Well, let me show you. I'm going to type in C followed by a question mark right after it, and that filters it down to just the C words. I see there's some that are CL, some that are CO, some that are CR. Now, why on earth do you care how things are spelled, Jeremy? Well, that's because that tab key finishes any partially typed command. But in order to use that, the switch has to know what command you're typing. So if I type CO and hit the tab key, it doesn't work. It's not doing anything because it doesn't know if I'm typing in configure or copy. But if I type in CON, now I've typed enough letters for it to recognize what I mean. And when I hit the tab key, it finishes that for me. That's why I said it was very difficult for me to type configure terminal, is I don't think I've typed that full command in years. I always just type enough characters for it to recognize it and hit the tab key. Now that question mark works here as well, so I can say, switch, tell me what to type next. And it looks like it's duplicated, terminal, terminal. Well, that's just because someone was very lazy and said, well, here's the command you can type and here's the description, just like you can see in the columns above. They didn't really type a full description for it. What that means is I want to configure from the terminal prompt. Now T is enough to make it unique, so I hit the tab key and it finishes it for me. Some switches and manufacturers will make you type the full command and press enter. Others will allow you to type just enough characters for it to be unique, and I should probably stop talking and typing at the same time, and it'll recognize it. For instance, I can type con T, and it'll say, help, I recognize what command you mean because that's enough characters for it to be unique. That's what the tab key does. Arrow keys, you just want to use up and down, up and down, up and down. It'll recall the previously typed commands, so if you mistype something, you can easily fix it. I think the only one of these general navigation modes I didn't hit was Control Z. Yes, that's a Z, not a 2. The beauty of Control Z is it drops you back to privilege mode no matter where you're at. It's for you folks out there that are speed demons. I'm going to type in configure terminal, and let's say I'm in the middle of typing a command. This is my command, right? And I'm halfway through typing it, and I'm like, you know what? Forget it. I just want to bail out to privilege mode. Well, obviously, you can't type in exit or end right here, which are both commands that move you back to privilege mode. Exit moves you one level at a time. End moves you all the way back, no matter where you are. But at any point in time, I can hit Control Z, and boom, I'm back to privilege mode. Cool. Last mode we'll talk about for now is interface configuration mode. And actually, before we get there, I want to talk about these guys. Are show commands. There are literally hundreds of show commands you can type on a switch, but I want to start you out with these two. And actually, I just thought of another one I want to show you. This will also help me emphasize the modes. If I'm in global configuration mode and I type in show IP interface, for example, it's going to say, oh, that's an unrecognized command. But if I come back here to privilege mode and type in show IP interface, it's going to say, oh, well, here's the interface that you have. So it's not only good enough to know what command to type, you need to know what mode that command belongs in. So let me show you the command I had just thought of. Show interfaces, and I'll hit the question mark so you can see all the options. The one that I'm after is status. Type that in and press the enter key. This shows me all the ports on this switch. Now this is an SG300 10-port switch. I see these guys are copper Ethernet ports. These guys are combo ports because the last two ports on the switch can take an SFP, which lets you do either fiber or copper. And I see the status of the switch. Now, right now, everything's down. That's not really what I'm after right now. What I'm after is what interfaces does this switch have? Because I can now go into global configuration mode. That's my first mode to go in. Then I can go into the interface configuration mode. In this case, interface GI1. I hit the enter key and check out my prompt. It moved from global to interface config mode. Now all of the commands that I type affect just that interface. You're getting the feel why these modes are so relevant. And now I can also show you the big difference between exit and end. Exit moves you back one level at a time, whereas end moves you all the way back to the beginning with one command. Boom. And Control Z does the same thing as the end command. Now that you have a base understanding of the modes, I'm sitting at a privilege mode prompt. I'm going to type in the command show because we can actually see things from this prompt. Show IP interface. I hit the tab key, which finishes a partially typed command, and press the enter key, and I can see that it's actually showing me this switch has two IP addresses, or that's what it looks like anyway. 0000/32 on the VLAN 1 interface, that's what this IF means, and that's a DHCP. Now what that means is this switch is going to try and get an IP address via DHCP. So when it plugs into a network, it's going to start yelling out, hey, will somebody give me an IP address? Now if you're on a production network, something will give it an IP address because there's going to be a DHCP server out there, and that is a pain. It's because now I've got to look on the back of the switch, and you can see right there, there's the MAC address of the switch. I've got to go to the DHCP server of the network, figure out what IP address it gave that MAC address, and then access that. I don't like that. I like being able to Google and find out what my default IP address is, which you can see that's the second one, 192.168.1.254 there. That's the way that we access it through that web interface. Now, I'm going to move into global configuration mode by typing in configure terminal. Again, I'm typing in enough characters and pressing the tab key to finish the command. I'm now sitting in global configuration mode. Every command that I can type from here, matter of fact, I'm going to hit the question mark. There's a list of the commands that I can type. All of them affect the switch globally. That's because I'm in global configuration mode. So I'm going to hit the space bar, go down a few times. I'm just hitting space to scroll through the whole list. Lots of commands, but I'm not interested in a global configuration command. I'm interested in configuring that VLAN 1 interface. No, some of you are thinking, what is interface VLAN 1? I'll press the enter key. VLANs are such a huge topic. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to create an entire series just on VLANs. They will change your life. And I mean that. It stands for virtual LAN. And what it is a way of segmenting a switch, breaking it up into multiple networks. Now, truth be told, just about every managed switch in the world supports VLANs. It's just they all have VLAN 1 by default, which is why everything can communicate with everything on that switch. Everything is in VLAN 1. So when I go on this computer and I type in interface VLAN 1, I'm accessing this make-believe interface, this virtual interface inside of that switch. And it's primarily used for management. So I'm going to give it the IP address. Let's say IP address 10.5.10.10. Just an IP address that I made up. I'll hit the question mark and it's saying, okay, the next thing you need to type is either the subnet mask or a slash notation. Two different ways of writing the subnet mask. I'll put 255.255.255.0. Hit the enter key and boom. New IP address is assigned to the switch. Now remember, I said we're after accomplishing two things for a base configuration: changing the password and assigning an IP address. Now we've just assigned the IP address, and the password, it just kind of forced us to change it when we logged in. It said, do you want to change it? And we said, sure. But I want to show you, maybe you said, no, I don't want to change the password there. What then? Well, user accounts are a global thing. They globally affect the switch, right? So I'm going to exit out of the VLAN interface configuration mode. And I'm going to type in username, Cisco, because that's the user that's on this switch by default. Password, and then a new password. So I'll put P@SSW0RD. Now it's giving me an error. Password, I can't repeat the current. It's saying it already has that password. I just wanted to show you, if you didn't reset the password at the very beginning, that's how you can change the password for a specific user on this switch. Now, one last thing I want to show you before we leave the command prompt. I'm going to exit back out one more level, back to privilege mode. I'll hit the enter key a couple times just to give myself a blank line. I don't know. I just always do that. And I want to save my configuration. To do that, I type in copy running config to startup config. Essentially, that's saying take what's in RAM, what's running on this switch, and make it the configuration that it starts with the next time it reboots. It says, are you sure you want to overwrite your startup config? I'm going to say absolutely yes, and it's now saving the configuration. At this point, I could unplug the switch, and the next time it reboots, it would still have that IP address and this password assigned to the user account of Cisco. If I didn't type that command and rebooted it, it would just go back to its default configuration. Okay, at this point, we are done with command line configuration. I'm going to bail out of the terminal, disconnect the console cable. So make sure that I can access it remotely once it gets into the rack. I'm going to plug my USB to Ethernet adapter back in again, plug in the Ethernet cable, and assign my computer an IP address that's in the same network as that switch. I'm going to go to network, choose the Ethernet adapter, and it was 10.5.10.10 that I gave the switch. So let's give this guy 10.5.10.20. Now, everything we've done so far is with a Class C subnet mask, where the first 3 octets represent the network. And so as long as I give this device an IP address from 10.5.10 network, I'm good. I could be 20, 100, 120, whatever. I'll hit apply, open a command prompt. I'll type in ping 10.5.10.10. I'm good. I'm accessing it. Good. Let's open a web browser and go to that same IP address in the web browser, 10.5.10.10. Nice. I think we're ready to try this on the production devices. You ready? Well, before we go plugging into console ports in our network closets, we need to have a game plan. You would be astounded at how many network technicians, because they know how to do something, will run in and plug in and then realize, I have no idea what IP address I want to assign this device. And so they end up just picking one out of the air, which causes more problems in the long run. I'm planning on creating a series called VLAN and IP addressing, where I talk about the right way to do all of this, and it's gonna be amazing. I'm like already got so many ideas for that series. But for now, what I'm going to do is just assign each one of these switches an IP address that fits with the network that exists right now. Switch 1 will be 10.225.1.240. Switch 2 will be 10.225.1.241. And you get where I'm going with this. Switch 3 will be .242, and switch 4 will be .243. All of them will use a /24 subnet mask, which is also written 255.255.255.0. All right, well, I'm sitting in the server room. I've got my console cable, my laptop, and my handy-dandy notebook. Come on, Blues Clues fans, we just had a moment right there. We're going to get connected to these switches here in the rack and see if we have the credentials to get in. I'm going to get plugged into this bottom switch first. There we go. And I'm on my Mac, so we'll get the screen command going. There's our device screen. Copy and paste that into place, and 9600 baud. Hit enter a couple times, and there's our username. Perfect. Cisco. Oh, type that wrong. Cisco. And that's not looking good. Cisco password. Admin Cisco. This is not looking hopeful. Admin. We're not going anywhere. So we'll come right here and hold in that reset button for a good 10 seconds or so. And release. And all the lights have gone out. I'm watching my screen here, and I'm watching now the switch go through the boot process. So right now it's actually decompressing the software image, putting it into RAM. It actually takes it out of its flash memory and puts it into the running memory, which is far faster than flash memory. I see the model number right there, SG328PP. A lot of interesting stuff on boot up. I see the software date that's on here, so it likely needs an upgrade, some 4 years old. And now it's generating its encryption keys, which takes a little while. Uses it for HTTPS and SSH and all other cryptography services. All right, and there it is, waiting for us to press the enter key twice to complete the detection process. I do that, it says there's our console speed, and we're ready to log in. Now at this point, it should be set back to default, which is Cisco. Do you want to change your password? We might as well hit no, and there I'm sitting at the switch prompts. Now, this is switch number 4 from that IP addressing plan I just created. So I'll do a quick show IP interface. And I see, it looks like it received an IP address via DHCP because this network is already running. So we're going to go in there and change that. I'm going to go to global configuration mode to configure terminal. We'll do interface VLAN 1. Oh, if I could type. Hit the up arrow, backspace, interface VLAN 1. There we go. And we'll type in IP address 10.225.1.243 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Hit the enter key. It says, please ensure the port through which the device is managed has proper settings. And the reason it's telling us that is because if we're remotely managing this and change the IP address to something that's inaccessible, we're doomed. We'll have to plug into the console port. It's a default message. It doesn't realize we're plugged into the console port when it sends us that. So it says, would you like to apply? Yes, I would. Oh, man. And sure enough, I'm on a production network. It's coming up and saying, hey, there's actually a duplicate IP address out there. So we get to have the fun game of finding out who that duplicate IP address is or changing our IP addressing scheme. We'll conquer that adventure soon enough. Let's back out and give ourselves an administrative username. and password that we're going to use. So we'll do username, Cisco, we'll stick with that. Password, we'll use that P@SSW0RD for the time being. Control Z back to privilege mode, and we'll do a copy running config to startup config. Oops. There we go. Yes. And it's saving. It's going to be pretty fervent that there is a duplicate IP address out there that we'll have to resolve. But at this point, switch number 4 is rocking and rolling. Now all we have to do is repeat that same process, those same commands for switch number 3, 2, and 1 in suite number 1 down there, and we are ready to go. Now, I told you at the beginning of this nugget that you will be able to implement a base level configuration for remote switch management. So here's what I want you to do. Create an IP addressing structure for your 4-switch environment, so design that out on paper. Then completely erase the existing configuration and assign a switch IP address on the switches that you've bought for your lab environment. Now, I used some Cisco SG300s in the lab and as the production switch here. You may have a completely different model, and that's great. Gives you the opportunity to apply the principles that we've learned, because they all need an IP address. They all need passwords for remote management. But Google around on how to reset the existing configuration on your switch and assign those IP addresses. You may also find that more passwords are necessary. I created a username of Cisco and a password of P@SSW0RD. But some switch models have a separate telnet password. Some of them will have user accounts. Some of them will have enable passwords.